Picture the scene. It's Berlin-Neukölln, September 2023. You've got this massive show of force, flashing blue lights, just flooding the streets. Police are executing a raid against the Remo family, and they seize 77 properties. We're talking over 9 million euros worth. Now, on paper, that looks like a decisive victory for the rule of law, right? The state is flexing its muscles, it's reclaiming the neighborhood. But if you look past the sirens, past the headlines, there's a much quieter, stranger reality unfolding right there on the sidewalk. While the state prosecutors are absolutely buried under mountains of paperwork, just trying to make these seizures stick, the actual power dynamic on the street, it hasn't shifted an inch. When two local shopkeepers get into a dispute, they don't call the police anymore. They call the family patriarch. His word settles the debt. His verdict ends the fight. So the police are there for the raid, sure, but the law that actually functions day to day, that's being decided by someone else entirely. And this isn't just happening in the shadow of organized crime. 500 kilometers away, inside the Thuringian state parliament, the exact same kind of paralysis is playing out. Not through violence, but through the weaponization of bureaucratic rules that are just grinding democracy to a halt. From clan bosses replacing judges to politicians sabotaging institutions from the inside. What we're watching isn't a dramatic revolution. It's something far more unsettling. A slow-motion erosion where the state isn't being overthrown. It's just being rendered irrelevant. Okay, so let's unpack this a bit. We have these three remarkably different scenarios. You've got crime bosses basically acting as judges, politicians weaponizing the very rules of bureaucracy, and then a kind of state indifference to targeted violence. And they all seem to point to the same pretty unsettling conclusion. The authority of the state is being hollowed out from the inside. We're going to dive into what these dynamics really look like on the ground, and we're starting right there on the streets of Berlin.
You know, it's fascinating because what's described in Berlin-Neukölln, it really goes beyond what we think of as traditional organized crime.
Right. It's not just about selling drugs or running protection rackets.
Exactly. What we're actually seeing here is the emergence of a functioning parallel governance structure, a shadow state, if you will. And it steps in precisely where the constitutional state is seen as, well, weak or slow.
So it's a direct challenge.
It's a direct challenge to the state's monopoly on justice and on order.
So the core issue then isn't just that crime exists. I mean, crime is everywhere. It seems to be that these criminal networks have had a fundamental realization that the state's mechanisms just aren't robust enough to instill any genuine fear or, immediate consequence. How do they get to that conclusion? Is this perceived weakness a systemic thing, or is it more about them exploiting specific loopholes?
Oh, it's absolutely systemic. It stems from the very structure of the justice system itself. A critical factor that our sources point to is leniency, particularly for young offenders. Investigators note that when you're young, you can effectively get away with a lot. There's this significant lag time. It often involves multiple escalating offenses before the full weight of the justice system finally comes down with a serious sentence.
So that delay is the vulnerability.
That delay is a crucial vulnerability.
So if you're saying the system takes, 3 years and maybe 10 minor offenses before an offender faces any real meaningful consequences, that 3-year period is essentially a free-for-all, a window of opportunity for criminal activity without any real check on it.
It is, and more than that, it serves as an early criminal education.
An education.
Yes. In these high-crime neighborhoods, young people learn very, very quickly the risk-reward calculus of crime. They internalize that the judicial business model is slow, it's complex, it's prone to leniency and appeals. This education, this practical experience, it shapes the organized crime leadership of tomorrow.
So they're not just learning the illegal trade.
No. They're learning not only the mechanics of a criminal enterprise, but also how to exploit the administrative weakness of the state. They learn the system's own rules better than the system does, in some ways.
And part of that exploitation is this denial strategy you mentioned, that criminals will steadfastly deny everything, even when the evidence is staring them in the face. That sounds like a tactic specifically designed to clog up the legal machinery that's already so slow.
That is precisely the aim. It's a tactic of attrition.
Attrition.
Think about it. When every single charge, no matter how strong the evidence is met with an unyielding denial, the legal system then has to expend immense resources.
Time, manpower,
expert witnesses, court time, all to prove simple, obvious facts. It exhausts state resources, it delays the process, and critically, it reinforces that perception of impunity back on the streets.
Which in turn makes their parallel system, their patriarch, look far more decisive and efficient.
Infinitely more. It's instant justice versus a system that takes years.
Okay, so let's move from the tactics to the structure itself, because this isn't just a few gangs operating independently. We are talking about a robust, parallel economy.
That's right. These are massive networks. The source material really emphasizes that in certain areas, nearly every extended family is represented in some way.
A family.
In some capacity, yes.
Yeah.
And in these structures, size directly translates into power. The larger the network, the greater their social and their economic leverage becomes. They create an alternative infrastructure that mirrors the legitimate one, but it's all controlled centrally by the clans.
And what seems so sophisticated about it is how successfully they've blurred the lines between what's legal and what's illegal. We all hear the cliches about money laundering through, cash-heavy businesses, but this integration seems to go much, much deeper into the actual municipal economy.
Much deeper. While the stereotypical examples like shisha bars or certain restaurants, they definitely exist, the real power comes from infiltrating essential community services.
Okay, like what?
We're talking about barbershops, yes, but also all-night delivery services.
Yeah.
And surprisingly, really core trades like plumbers, electricians, security services, and locksmiths.
Locksmiths, wow.
So if you're a regular resident and you have a burst pipe at 2 in the morning, you might unknowingly be calling a clan-controlled service to fix it.
So these legal fronts have a dual purpose. They're not just cleaning the money. More importantly, they give the criminal structure a kind of legitimacy and a stable, high-volume presence right inside the community. It almost makes them indispensable.
That's it exactly. They leverage the demand for reliable, speedy services that, frankly, the standard legal bureaucracy often struggles to provide. They use the entire infrastructure of the legal world bank accounts, commercial registrations, physical storefronts, and they merge it seamlessly with the illegal sector.
Which must be a nightmare for law enforcement.
It's an exponentially harder task. Investigating this web is so much more difficult than simply raiding a drug factory, because they have to untangle entire, seemingly legitimate business supply chains.
And nowhere is this focus on logistics and efficiency more visible than in how the drug trade itself has evolved. This drug taxi business, it sounds less like a back alley deal and more like a highly optimized, customer-friendly mobile service.
It is astonishingly modern and efficient. This is not a street corner deal anymore.
Right.
Dealers are using encrypted mobile phone chats, things like Telegram, as their storefronts. They offer their goods, often with pictures, clear price lists, even quantity discounts. And the deals are all arranged privately in the chat.
And then the delivery.
Then you have hundreds of couriers operating these so-called drug taxis all across the city, providing fast, localized delivery. It's essentially illegal e-commerce.
Yeah.
Optimized for speed and discretion.
It's the Amazon Prime of organized crime.
In a way, yes. It's the complete consumerization of the drug trade.
But what is the critical financial link here that you think people really need to understand? When someone makes that convenient purchase, where does the money actually go?
This is the crucial point. The control and the ultimate destination of that money. This incredibly lucrative high-volume business is not run by a bunch of independent entrepreneurs. It is heavily controlled by the established criminal gangs and clans in Berlin.
And the money flows up.
All the way up. And this is the chilling thought we have to consider. When consumers use these apps for convenience, they are unknowingly supporting massive organized crime networks. Yeah. And worryingly, our sources indicate this funding stream extends, in some cases, to terrorist organizations.
Wow.
So it transforms what seems like a private, personal transaction into a potential financial pillar for global threat actors.
And you really see the raw, coercive power of these networks when you look at the internal communications that were recovered from encrypted services like EncroChat. It shows a judicial system that needs no police, no judge, and no jury.
Those retrieved communications, they provide a terrifying window to this non-state judicial system.
Yeah.
Take the exchange between two figures, Nasser Remo and Tim A.G., after they felt they'd been swindled by a dealer. The language is just stark. It's, that bastard, he wants to screw us. Have him pay $10,000 or we'll fuck up his life.
That's it. That's the verdict.
That is instant summary judgment. There is no appeal, no due process. There is only immediate coercive enforcement. The clan decides the judgment, often involving steep financial penalties or threats of extreme violence, and they have the undisputed power on the street to execute that sentence immediately.
And they can do all that without ever having to touch the physical product themselves.
Exactly. They organize the entire financial operation and profit enormously from a position of management and control.
Which just makes the state's efforts to enforce its own power feel, I don't know, almost ceremonial in contrast. Like those massive property seizure raids we started with. The state can make a big show of seizing assets, but the day-to-day power structure doesn't seem to budge at all.
That is the crux of the frustration for law enforcement. The seizures, 77 properties worth over 9 million euros from a family like the Remos, they make huge headlines. They signal state vigor.
It looks good on the evening news.
It looks fantastic. But the process behind the scenes is excruciatingly slow. Prosecutors become absolutely buried in complex, time-consuming paperwork that's required to legally ironclad those seizures. In the meantime, the street-level power, the ability to arbitrate disputes and ensure business continuity, that remains firmly in the clan's hands.
And this control isn't just limited to those specific neighborhoods that are often associated with high crime, is it? They're actively seeking legitimacy in space in more affluent areas, too.
Yes, there's a very clear move toward normalization and high-end residency. Our sources highlight that these clans have increasingly moved into well-to-do suburbs, like Kleinmach now.
And why there?
Well, this move serves several purposes. It helps to diversify their image, it provides a safe, high-quality environment for their own families, and perhaps most importantly, it demonstrates that the state cannot effectively contain or restrict their influence to specific geographic pockets. They can operate anywhere.
The legal drama surrounding the rapper Bushido and his former manager, the clan boss Arafat Abu Chaka. That seems like maybe the most explicit example of how this clan structure protects its wealth, right in plain sight, even when it's being challenged in a civil court.
It's a truly remarkable illustration of their asset protection strategy. And it really treats the constitutional state as a mere observer.
So what happened there?
Well, when Bushido successfully forced the sale of their shared villa ensemble, and this was a sprawling property, multiple buildings, underground parking, a spa after their partnership dissolved, you'd expect an open market sale.
Right, highest bidder gets it.
Instead, the property was sold to a sole bidder, Abu Chaka's 21-year-old son, for just half its market value.
Wait, half the market value? How does the state or the legal system even allow that to happen if the whole point was to dissolve the assets fairly?
It happens because the legal action forces a sale. But the internal dynamics of the clan ensure the asset remains in the family's control. By securing the property through an inside bid at a deflated price, the asset, the property itself, the legitimacy it confers, and the financial structure, it all remains firmly intact, right within the clan's sphere of influence. The legal system was used to execute a transaction, but the state, despite its high-profile involvement, was essentially relegated to the role of a spectator watching an internal property transfer.
And when you zoom out from these street-level and legal battles and you look at the political response to this profound erosion of authority, you just start seeing, well, paralysis at the highest levels.
The political failure is perhaps the most worrying indicator of decline. The documentary cited in our source materials, it highlights a severe lack of political accountability. At the time, the governing mayor, Franziska Giffey, and the senator responsible for the Ministry of the Interior, a woman named Irisa, they both refused repeated requests for comment. That refusal speaks volumes. It suggests either a lack of interest, a lack of answers, or maybe an outright admission that they just lack the tools or maybe the will to tackle the issue.
And when leaders refuse to engage with a problem that urgent, their substitute actions can feel almost insulting to the public who are actually living with the real-world consequences.
They resort to these superficial, almost satirical gestures. The source material correctly terms them absurd symbols of vigor.
I like that.
The example given is the Green District Mayor, Clara Heron, celebrating the realization of 2 or 3 outdoor public restrooms after 5 long years of planning and political wrangling.
5 years for a public toilet.
5 years. Now contrast that tiny, hard-won municipal victory with the massive multi-million euro, highly efficient criminal network operating drug taxis just a few blocks away.
It's governance by tokenism. It's completely disconnected from the reality on the ground.
It is. And the takeaway here is urgent for Berlin's future. When these urgent problems, like parallel governance structures, are ignored, when authorities and emergency services feel abandoned by their political leadership, ordinary citizens are driven to reject the state's legitimacy entirely. And if this disparity continues, the assessment is clear. Berlin risks sinking into insignificance, losing its status as a city that commands respect or even envy, either nationally or internationally.
That picture of Berlin is it's deeply unsettling. You have a state that's functionally demoted to a spectator role by these powerful crime families. But the erosion of legitimacy isn't just about external forces exploiting weakness. It's also happening inside the halls of power, where political ambition is weaponizing the very rules that are meant to govern the system. So now we're transitioning from the chaotic streets of Neukölln to the seemingly mundane legislative process in state parliaments.
And this is where we see a kind of internal sabotage. It's a failure that's achieved not through violence, but through bureaucracy. We're looking at how institutional rules designed for democratic scrutiny, are being strategically misused for political gain.
Yeah.
And sometimes with incredibly serious national and even international implications.
Okay, let's start with what you call the paradox of opposition amendments. Why on earth do opposition members of parliament MPs spend enormous political and staff resources drafting these extensive, highly technical amendments to government bills when they know empirically that those amendments will almost certainly fail?
It's a profound puzzle if you only look at it through the lens of traditional political motivations.
Right, because they don't pass.
They don't. If you analyze the success rates, they are dismal. Historically, success rates for opposition amendments are incredibly low, something like 7% in the UK, and in other contexts, as low as 0.6%. So it can't be a policy motivation, because they fail. And it's not an electoral motivation, because these technical details are almost invisible to the public and the media.
Nobody wins an election based on the nuance of a banking regulation amendment.
Exactly.
So if it's not about changing policy and it's not about winning public votes, the mechanism must be designed for an internal audience, which leads us to this office-seeking motivation.
Precisely. This is all about intra-party signaling. It's a performance for the people inside your own party. Ambitious legislators use this difficult, resource-intensive work as a high-stakes internal job application. They were signaling skill, demonstrating expertise, and proving competence directly to their party peers, and crucially to the party leadership that holds the keys to promotion.
Could you elaborate a bit on why drafting an amendment is seen as a credible commitment and not just, cheap talk like giving a fiery speech?
Because it requires genuine technical skill and a huge amount of effort. To draft a successful, functional amendment, you have to read the entire underlying bill, you have to understand the legal and policy nuances, and then you have to structure your counterproposal with formal, legally sound objectives.
It's
incredibly resource-intensive work. A superficial speech is cheap talk. A technically rigorous amendment is a credible commitment that proves you are capable of the hard technical work of governing. And that is something party leaders desperately need when they're building their future teams of ministers and chairs.
So the legislative review process, in a way, becomes this highly competitive internal testing ground for the party's future elite.
Absolutely. And the data confirms this logic. We see clear empirical evidence that MPs who dedicate more resources and successfully propose more amendments, even if those amendments are ultimately defeated, are significantly more likely to be promoted to higher office in the very next legislative term.
So it really works.
It does. This means getting appointments to prestigious positions like committee chairs, ministerial roles, or critically, that promotion from a state parliament up to the national parliament, the Bundestag. It is the accepted, if somewhat perverse, mechanism for climbing the political career ladder in a party-centric system.
That is a remarkable finding. A significant portion of what we think of as democratic legislative activity is essentially a theatrical performance designed for career advancement, not necessarily for the direct benefit of the constituents. But this internal activity, it takes a much darker and more alarming turn when it's used by extremist parties.
This is where the signaling shifts entirely from career ambition to, alleged espionage and institutional sabotage. We see this acutely with the far-right Alternative for Germany party, the AfD, specifically in the eastern state of Thuringia. They are accused of submitting an extraordinary volume of parliamentary questions to systematically gather sensitive intelligence.
And the concern raised by the authorities isn't just the volume of questions, right? It's that they weren't asking about general policy or voter statistics. They were targeting critical state infrastructure.
That's what raised the major security flags, according to Thuringia's Interior Minister George Meyer. He claimed the AfD showed a particular interest in an incredibly specific checklist of sensitive state assets. This included things like internal police IT systems and their equipment, the state's drone detection and defense mechanisms, civil protection resources, local healthcare facilities, and even detailed German military activities that were being conducted within the state's borders.
These are not items you'd find on a standard party platform. If they're seeking granular details on drone defense mechanisms and police IT systems, what does that suggest about the intent behind the questions?
It suggests an intent far beyond normal democratic oversight. This is information that is crucial for state resilience and security.
For example?
For example, knowing the vulnerabilities of police IT systems could aid in disruptive cyber attacks. Understanding drone defense capabilities reveals operational weaknesses that could be exploited. The minister, Mayer, he went public with an explosive claim. He stated the AFD appeared to be working through a list of checklists from the Kremlin with its inquiries.
That is a highly charged allegation linking domestic political activity directly to the security agenda of a foreign power. How was that received by the broader intelligence community?
It was corroborated, at least in principle, by sources within the German parliament's intelligence committee. One member supported the assessment, claiming that Russia systematically uses its influence, especially in the AfD, to spy and obtain sensitive information. And the ultimate goal, as defined in the source, is gathering intelligence for hybrid warfare.
And just for our listeners, when we use that term hybrid warfare in this context, we aren't talking about tanks rolling across a border or airstrikes. We're talking about something much more subtle, non-kinetic means of destabilization.
Precisely. Hybrid warfare here is the systematic erosion of a state's social and institutional cohesion. Using the democratic right of a member of parliament to ask questions in order to gather intelligence on critical infrastructure. That's an elegant form of hybrid warfare. It weaponizes the system against itself. It generates security risks and legislative paralysis at the same time, all while allowing the party to claim they are simply performing their constitutional duty of oversight.
Now, we absolutely have to note that AfD officials have vehemently dismissed all these allegations. They called them absurd suspicions. But this is all happening in the context of their growing power in Germany.
Absolutely. The political context is inescapable here. The AfD has faced mounting scrutiny over alleged ties to foreign state interests, and yet they continue to grow in electoral strength. Recent surveys show them becoming the strongest party in certain areas, even slightly ahead of the ruling conservative bloc nationally. So whether the motivation is intra-party careerism or alleged collaboration with foreign intelligence, the institutional impact is the same. The democratic mechanisms intended for good governance are being strategically misused, leading to systemic distrust and palpable security vulnerabilities. And this thematic thread of state structures failing, not through some overt destruction, but through internal exploitation and neglect, it leads us seamlessly to our third area, the profound erosion of fundamental rights protection for specific communities across Europe. This isn't about structural weakness or political games. This is about the state's inconsistent application of its most basic duty, ensuring public safety and freedom for all its citizens.
Right, so this next section looks at what seems to be a growing wave of intolerance and discrimination documented across Europe. And it suggests the state is failing to consistently ensure public order and protect fundamental rights, especially religious freedom for all citizens. Let's start by looking at the hard data on anti-Christian hate crimes.
We're relying on extensive data compiled by an organization called OIDE, which is the Observatory on Intolerance and Discrimination Against Christians in Europe. Their latest reports illustrate a persistent high volume of these incidents.
What are the numbers?
The 2023 figures documented 2,444 anti-Christian hate crimes across 35 countries. That number included 232 personal, physical attacks. The 2024 report, which uses a combination of police data, reports from the OSCE, and independent civil society research, documented 2,211 incidents. This is not a marginal issue. It is a major ongoing societal phenomenon.
And where is this hostility most concentrated? Which countries are seeing the highest numbers?
The most affected countries that consistently lead this list are France, the United Kingdom, Germany, Spain, and Austria. But the real challenge here is understanding the true scope of the problem, because official reporting mechanisms often dramatically undercount what's actually happening, which leads to a profound data gap.
And Germany provides maybe the most alarming example of that statistical disparity. Our sources show this shocking increase of 105% in officially acknowledged anti-Christian hate crimes between 2022 and 2023. That number rose to 277 incidents. But you're saying that number is highly misleading.
It is deeply misleading because of how the official statistics are categorized in Germany. The official stats only count crimes that are classified as politically motivated hate crimes.
So if there isn't a clear political note left at the scene, it doesn't count.
Exactly. If an arson attack on a church or the systematic vandalism of a cemetery doesn't have an easily established political motive, it simply doesn't make the count. It's just treated as generic vandalism or property damage.
So what does the reality look like when you look beyond that very narrow official definition?
When OIDAC combined the narrow official police figures with data from civil society groups and figures they got directly from various German federal states just on property damage to Christian places of worship, which was a huge effort, the estimated number of cases of property damage in 2023 alone was at least 2,000.
2,000.
2,000. So that gap between 277 incidents officially acknowledged as politically motivated hate crimes and 2,000 estimated property damage cases, it signals a massive systemic failure to consistently track, acknowledge, and most importantly, address targeted violence against a specific community.
And France also reports an extremely high volume, nearly 1,000 anti-Christian attacks recorded in 2023.
Yes, and the pattern is similar. The majority, 90%, targeted physical infrastructure churches and cemeteries. This was alongside 84 personal attacks. Across Europe, the types of violence are very clear. Vandalism, often involving desecration, accounts for 62% of incidents. Arson attacks make up about 10%. And then you have personal attacks, which include physical violence, threats, and tragically, murder or attempted murder. The targeting of these sites isn't random. It's symbolic, and it's designed to instill fear in a community.
And we have to highlight the particular and I think often ignored vulnerability of religious converts.
This is a group that faces an acute and unique danger because they are often unprotected by traditional communal support systems. Converts to Christianity from a Muslim background are especially vulnerable to physical violence, often stemming from threats within their own former communities, or even families who might deem them apostates. The disturbing case of Javaid Nouri in the UK is illustrative of this. He was a convert who narrowly escaped an attempted murder by his own flatmate, who held precisely that view, that he was an apostate who deserved to die. When the state fails to acknowledge the source of that violence and provide adequate protection, it just compounds the isolation of these extremely vulnerable citizens.
So moving from violence to the legislative front, the erosion of rights is actually becoming codified, written into law. We're talking about restrictions on religious expression that result in a profound chilling effect. This isn't about state neglect anymore. This is about the state actively constricting fundamental rights.
This is where the state shifts from being a weak spectator to an active enforcer of conformity. And the major flashpoint for this is the introduction of buffer zone laws. They're often known as public space protection orders, or PSPOs, in the UK, and there are similar laws in Spain. These zones, usually established around abortion clinics, restrict peaceful religious expression, effectively criminalizing private belief and conduct.
The case of Adam Smith Connor in the UK, the Army veteran who was convicted after praying silently in his own mind, it sounds almost dystopian. How did the legal system even rationalize that conviction?
The court's reasoning was based on its interpretation of the local public space protection order. The local authority argued, and the court agreed, that his conduct, which was evidenced only by his slightly bowed head and his clasped hands, amounted to disapproval of abortion.
Silent disapproval.
Silent internal disapproval. The court found that this silent act, performed in a public buffer zone, was sufficient for a conviction. The state was effectively punishing thought crime, or at least the external manifestation of internal thought, because it happened to fall within a politically sensitive exclusion zone.
And this leads to some truly absurd enforcement incidents on the ground.
It does. Our sources detail incidents in Birmingham where police approached individuals who were just standing peacefully in a buffer zone and asked them directly, "Are you here to pray for the lives of unborn children?" That level of scrutiny into private intention is a severe constraint on freedom of thought and conscience. The UK has since passed a national buffer zone law, which criminalizes any act deemed to be influencing someone within the zone, and that clearly includes prayer or even just holding a sign.
How does Spain's equivalent law contrast with the UK, specifically when it comes to the standards for prosecution?
The Spanish law gives the state even more discretionary power. It criminalizes any behavior that is deemed offensive by the staff or the woman accessing the clinic.
Deemed offensive, so it's subjective.
It's entirely subjective. And critically, it allows for discretionary prosecution by the state without any victim report. A state prosecutor can initiate criminal proceedings based on what they perceive as potentially offensive. It grants the state immense power to interfere with fundamental rights based on their own interpretation rather than harm caused to a specific victim.
And Scotland's proposed buffer zone law pushes this restriction even further, extending the reach of the state right into private spaces.
Scotland's law proposes criminalizing any act of influencing within a massive 200-meter radius.
200 meters is huge.
It's a huge area, and this ban extends to private homes. So even displaying a pro-life sign that's visible from outside your own window or having a private conversation that might be audible from the street could potentially constitute a criminal offense. When the state dictates what you can think, discuss, or display within your own home simply because it falls into this massive arbitrary zone, it represents a radical extension of state power into private life.
And beyond these specific spatial restrictions, we're seeing a worrying intensification in the criminalization of belief through these broad hate speech laws across Europe.
This is a significant challenge to two pillars of the European Convention on Human Rights. Article 9, which is freedom of thought and conscience, and Article 10, freedom of expression. We are seeing repeated legal action being taken against individuals for simply expressing traditional religious views. The cases of the Finnish MP and a Lutheran bishop are stark. They've been repeatedly tried for hate speech, just for citing a Bible verse. The legal system is being weaponized to police specific theological viewpoints.
And the case of the Maltese Christian, Matthew Gretsch, is equally troubling. He wasn't even preaching.
Matthew Gretsch was arrested simply for sharing his personal faith journey in a TV interview. He discussed how his views on sexual orientation had changed since he became a Christian. For that, he faced up to 5 months in prison for allegedly violating Malta's Affirmation of Sexual Orientation Act.
So it wasn't about discrimination or inciting violence?
Not at all. It was about criminalizing a personal testimony, the expression of one's own faith journey.
And the attempt to prosecute a Spanish priest, Father Custodio Ballester, for an article he wrote back in 2016 criticizing political Islam, where he faces up to 3 years in prison for an alleged hate crime. It just shows that this legal pressure is targeting a variety of conservative religious views.
The fundamental issue with these vague hate speech laws is that they often move beyond protecting vulnerable groups from genuine threats and instead become tools to suppress dissenting or traditional viewpoints. This disproportionately restricts public discourse, and it undermines the plurality that's essential for democratic societies, because citizens become terrified of expressing opinions that might be deemed subjectively offensive by someone, somewhere.
And this atmosphere of legal risk and political pressure, it naturally permeates into the workplace, leading to what looks like widespread discrimination in employment.
It's pervasive. The hostility increases significantly if individuals express traditional Christian beliefs, whether that's regarding marriage or the sanctity of life. You look at the case of Christy Higgs, a pastoral assistant who was dismissed after sharing concerns about transgenderism and sex education, and she did this in a private Facebook post. Private. An anonymous person reported her, and the school deemed that she had brought the institution into disrepute. Her private expression of her faith beliefs was sufficient grounds for dismissal, which demonstrates a clear hierarchy where institutional reputation outweighs an individual's right to conscience.
And even when the courts do step in to protect the individual, it's often a long, costly, and painful fight.
That's the dynamic we see with Felix Ngole, a Christian social worker whose job offer was withdrawn after his prospective employer discovered his traditional religious beliefs. Now, a tribunal eventually found that the employer had wrongly confused the expression of religious views with the notion of discrimination, which was a crucial legal victory. But the chilling effect remains. The fact that another employer admitted in a separate case that its equality and diversity policy takes precedence over religious belief demonstrates a clear and structural deprioritization of conscience rights in modern professional environments.
And all of these legislative and professional pressures, they combine to create this self-enforced silence that we call the chilling effect.
It is the inevitable response to legal and professional risk. The atmosphere leads to widespread self-censorship, particularly among the younger generation, who are more acutely aware of the social and professional consequences of nonconformity. The data is really sobering. Only 36% of UK Christians under the age of 35 feel free to express their views on social issues at work.
Only a third.
Students report being ostracized for holding pro-life views. And we hear anecdotal evidence of parents actively teaching their children to keep quiet about their faith in school, just to avoid being bullied.
And this self-censorship isn't just limited to faith issues, is it? It's now impacting political expression in general.
That is a crucial finding that really links all three parts of our dive today.
Yeah.
The German Freedom Index study found that for the first time since the 1950s, more Germans, 44%, said they could not express their political opinions freely than said they could, which was 40% in 2023. When citizens fear expressing basic political opinions, regardless of the issue, the foundational democratic contract is breaking down.
Okay, finally, let's turn to the most direct challenge to the state's duty to protect private life, the erosion of religious autonomy and parental rights. This is where we see secular courts actively intervening in what were previously considered strictly internal theological matters.
The state's reach is extending directly into the internal governance of religious institutions. A Belgian court convicted Catholic prelates for refusing a woman entry into deacon training. In doing so, the secular court disregarded the internal canonical law of the Catholic Church that reserves the diaconate only for men. This represents the state intervening in a profound theological and institutional decision, a clear overreach into religious autonomy.
And the Vatican itself protested a similar interference in France, right?
Yes, a French secular civil court ruled against the Vatican's own internal canonical procedures regarding the dismissal of a nun. The Vatican publicly called this a serious violation of the fundamental rights of religious freedom. When secular courts start mandating internal religious structure or personnel decisions, the separation of church and state, and thus religious freedom itself, is severely compromised.
Then we have the challenges to parental rights, which touch on the most sensitive area, the ability of parents to raise and educate their children according to their own religious and philosophical convictions.
We see this very clearly in cases concerning gender ideology. Consider the Swiss couple whose 16-year-old daughter was taken from them and placed in a state home.
Why?
The state intervened because the parents objected to their daughter's desired gender transition, and they alleged that doctors tried to provide her with puberty-blocking drugs without their parental consent. This demonstrates the state overriding fundamental parental rights that are guaranteed under international law, including the ECHR, to manage the physical and psychological care of their own child.
And looking ahead, the German government's announcement about medical curriculum changes raises some very serious concerns about the abolition of conscience clauses in the medical profession itself.
That proposal is highly contentious. The government announced plans to make the performance of abortions a compulsory part of the medical curriculum. They're specifically including the knowledge required to perform and justify medical and surgical abortions as a mandatory learning objective. The immediate implication of that is professional exclusion. If a Christian medical student has a conscientious objection to performing or justifying abortion and therefore cannot fulfill this compulsory objective, they are effectively excluded from the entire medical profession in Germany.
Which means the state is violating the right to live and act in accordance with one's conscience, which international human rights law says should enjoy absolute protection from external coercion.
That is the core conflict. By making a procedure compulsory, the state is applying that external coercion. So when the state fails to uphold its monopoly on justice on the streets, when political mechanisms are used for foreign intelligence gathering or just for self-promotion, and when basic freedoms of thought, conscience, and assembly are systematically restricted or neglected, the combined effect is a profound systemic loss of legitimacy across the entire system.
What we've explored today really shows the fragility of our institutions when they're under pressure from three very distinct directions. You've got organized crime carving out functioning microstates within cities using these sophisticated parallel economies. Then you have political actors who are prioritizing internal signaling over substance and allegedly facilitating foreign intelligence. And finally, you have laws creating a chilling effect that restricts fundamental human rights like freedom of thought and conscience for specific communities. This really is a story of slow erosion, not a sudden collapse.
The increasing disparity between the documented severity and volume of attacks against vulnerable communities, like that doubling of anti-Christian property damage incidents in Germany, or the jihadist attacks we've seen in Spain, and the institutional reluctance to classify and report these crimes accurately. It suggests a systemic failure of consistent protection for all citizens. If political systems and police statistics choose to only recognize violence when it fits a narrow, predetermined political framework, then the rule of law is demonstrably failing to serve the safety and fundamental rights of a substantial portion of the population.